Hi everyone, to everyone watching this. This will be my workshop about Marvelous Designer, which is an amazing software. My name is Elisabetta. I work in the research and development department of BigRock, and I've been trying to do this workshop because I grew up passionate about Marvelous Designer. It's a great software, it's an amazing tool, it's very much useful for creating every type of clothing and every type of fabric that you might need for your 3D models. And it's quite user-friendly, and once you get the hang of it, it's nice and it's amazing, it's quick, and it will make your life a lot easier whenever you have to create something that regards garment or clothes. And in this case, we need to say a couple of things. First thing first, whenever you open up the software for the first time, the software will ask you three things. These three things will be the language of the software. Of course, I suggest you to use the English language because it'll be easier for you if you have to watch a little bit of tutorials online or you have to search for things. English is always the preferred language for every 3D software. And the second one would be the scale unit. I suggest you to use the centimeters or whatever you feel better at using. I would be using the centimeters. And the third thing, which in my opinion is the most important one, is the way that you can navigate around in the software. By default, Marvelous Designer has its own, but I suggest you to use the Maya one, which will be the one that I will be using. And I will be using that one because I learned how to use Maya as the first software that I've ever got my head into. So it's just a convenience for me. It's easier for me. That's it. You can decide. You can pick whatever, but I will be using Maya. And once you confirm that, the interface will appear and the software will be open. And first thing first, you have to do one thing, which is necessary to me in order for you to not get confused while using the program and while creating your beautiful patterns and clothings. You have to go into preferences before doing anything else. And you have to change the gizmo, which by default it's in screen coordinate, but it's quite messy. It can be confusing because the gizmo will appear and will rotate around and will change its position based on the way you have your viewport positioned. So it's a little bit confusing. I suggest you to use local coordinate, which is the gizmo that will appear wherever you point your 3D cursor, your mouse. So use that. I will be using that, and it's quite important. You have to do it because by default it's not that, and you can easily get confused, especially if you come from a background where you've used other 3D softwares as Maya, Blender, or whatever. So this software is amazing. I really loved it, and that's why I'm trying to do this, because I really I would appreciate to pass on this passion that's grew into me, and it really is a quick way to creating and to model, and it's beautiful. It's super powerful. It can be scary at first, because if you look at it and if you've opened it for the first time, it can be scary. There's a lot of tools. There's a lot of things in the viewport that can be confusing. But trust me on this one. I want to transmit this kind of curiosity to explore a little bit further this 3D software. I will try not to do tutorial after tutorial. You can find plenty of them online. I instead will be trying to teach you a little bit of the fundamentals of the way this software acts And you know, it's those kind of things that will make you be capable of doing things on your own, not necessarily teaching you how to create something step by step, apart from a little t-shirt that we'll be creating and a little bit of pants, just to show you the using of the tools. But it's just, you know, I want to inspire you to explore on your own this software, because it really is amazing. But the things that we can say about it, there's plenty of them. So I will be going about the you know, the fundamentals about this program. So let's start off by looking at this. And what is this? You know, you can find yourself a little bit confused, because there's a lot of things. You have to know that a lot of the tools that we can see in the 3D viewport, you can find them also in the 2D viewport, and they will act the same, so don't get scared. And there's a lot of icons here that we'll see what they do later on, because we need to create something in order to know what they will do. So let's go on, and let's start off by adding some kind of character in our scene, because you can, you know, the 3D viewport will be useful for you to simulate the patterns and the fabrics, but you have to simulate on something. You know, you can let your fabrics fall to the ground, but that will not be you know, useful for what we're doing. So I need to add a character. I want to add a character. Marvelous Designer is already has already a library built in. This library, we can find it here in the top left corner. We can click on it and this will appear. By default, it will be on garment. We can select avatar, because we can find a lot of things here, a lot of pre-built-in things. We will not be using the pre-built garment, because we'll be creating our own, but we can add an avatar. If you have a character that you want to simulate your fabrics, that you want to dress up, you can easily add it into your scene by file, import, and you can select your OBJ or FBX file, whatever. Feel free to do it if you have one. I don't have one, so I will be using the male version of Marvelous, and we can find it here. We need to double click on it, and Marvelous will calculate and add it to the scene. This is what I see. Usually by default you will see it with the textures, so you will see it like this, textured surface. These icons here and these icons here regard only the display properties of our 3D viewport or 2D viewport. We can change things, we can change the way we see things and what we see, but these icons will not be changing the geometry itself or what we are creating. So don't worry, feel free to tweak them a little bit and find your own workflow, what you prefer to see and not what to not see. In my case, I prefer not to see the avatar with the texture, because it kind of gets my eye confused. I kind of get distracted a little bit, and so I prefer to use it with the monochrome setting. So I click on here. If you position your cursor here, you can select the other types of visualization that you can select here. So I will be going on monochrome surface, and that's what I see. You can also change the color of your monochrome surface, so of this character, because maybe it might be a little bit too bright. This white might be a little bit, you know, too upfront. So I select the pieces of the meshes, and so with the shift pressed, I click and just simply select, like everywhere else, like this. And if I go here, I can see that a property editor has opened up. It's a menu that opens up whenever you select something, and it shows you the properties of that thing that you've selected. So for me, I will be going into color here under this menu. By clicking on it, I can select a different color for all the pieces that I've selected. So I will go with a little bit of grayish color, that it's easier on the eyes in my opinion, but it's just, you know, it's your own preference to do so. So that's what I do. So I can see that in the 3D viewport I see my character, and in the 2D viewport I see the shape of the character. Actually, I've seen a lot of tutorials online that show you how to create stuff here in Marvelous, but they tend to create the patterns outside the shape. That's not what I like to do, but it's just my personal preference. I like to create the patterns using the shape because it's a little bit easier for me to understand the measurements and the dimensions of the things that I'm creating. So I want to create something because I want him with some clothes on, because it's a little bit, not legal to go around naked. So I want to dress him up, and I want to go ahead and create something. I can create a t-shirt and some kind of pants for you, so you can see the way that I create them and the tools that I use for them, and so that I can teach you step by step, but also explaining you a little bit of the fundamentals of this program, because it's kind of intuitive, but it has some differences between from the other 3D softwares that we might be more useful to use, or used to use. And so I recall the Polygon tool, which is the tool that allows me to create actually patterns, and I call it with the shortcut H. I will be teaching you as much as I can. I cannot stress how useful it is to understand and remember every shortcut, because it's really essential, because it'll speed things up and it'll make your life a lot easier. So I use shortcuts whenever I can. And the shortcut for the creation of the of pattern is the H. We can also create pattern in a geometric shape, like a rectangle or an ellipse, and we can use the S or the E shortcut. But I will be using the H because I want to decide, point by point, whether to place my segments and where to, create different type of lines in order to give my pattern a shape. So as you can see, I navigate here in the 3D viewport. I get a little bit closer and I'll show you the classic 2D pattern for the t-shirt. One thing that I would suggest to you is to go online and search a little bit for the 2D patterns of the things, because whenever you have to create a piece of clothing, it's not really that intuitive whether you have to create some kind of patterns or not. It's not that, at least it wasn't for me, so I had to search for them, and I suggest you to do the same, because once you do them in the right way, your process will be sped up a lot and things will be easier. So give it a little bit of study and try and research, and get your head around what creating a 2D pattern is, and you can see it yourself. I'll show you the classic way to create a basic t-shirt, not a difficult one, not a strange one, just a classic t-shirt. And for every piece of fabric that I will be creating, I will create them just in the half of them, because the other half will be mirrored, and that's useful because as you do in every 3D software, whenever you create something, you model something, it's always preferable to create them just half of them and then mirror them in order for you to be sure to have something that's perfectly symmetric. So this is the half of the t-shirt. So I place a point here. As you can see, whenever I get closer to the line, to this line, which is the center line of the center of the world in Marvelous Designer, my 3D cursor will snap to it. It's quite handy, so use it. I will be starting off here, and I'll place a point here, here, and here, and I'll go just about here. As you can see, I have pink lines These pink lines are just guidelines that will indicate whenever I'm perpendicular to a point or to a segment or to the world of Marvelous. These guides are quite handy too, so use them and don't ever get rid of them, because everything here in Marvelous is it's editable, and you can personalize the program as everything in every other software, but these are the things that I find useful. So yeah, I'll close this pattern here by clicking on the origin point, and I'll let Marvelous calculate it. So okay, so the pattern is created, and this half here is actually perfectly positioned here, as you can see. So one thing that we need to know is whenever we create something in a 2D viewport, it'll appear in the exact same spot in our 3D viewport. And it's important to know because whenever I've created something, I can move it around independently from the other viewport, and that would not change its positioning in the 3D viewport or vice versa. But whenever we create something that we obviously create it in the 2D viewport, that will be the place where it's positioned in the 3D viewport. Just something to know, because you have to navigate around whenever you have complex patterns here. It can be quite messy if you don't pay attention to this factor. So as I was saying, you can move something around in the 2D viewport without affecting the 3D viewport, and also vice versa. So you can move things in the 3D viewport, and keep in mind that as much as you can, try to help Marvelous in the simulation later on by positioning the patterns as best as you can along the character or along the meshes that you have in your scene. And I will be explaining further on better this kind of concept here, but keep it in mind for now. So this is my shape. Before mirroring it, I want to edit a little bit of the segments, because of course there's no t-shirts with this type of line with this perfect angle here. It has a little bit of round shape to it, so I will use another tool, which is one of the tools that I use most frequently, is the C tool that I call with the shortcut C, is the curve tool. Whenever I select the curve tool, you can see that around my 3D cursor I have a little bit of a spline icon next to it. This indicates the tool that I'm using, and it's also useful. It's one thing that Marvelous does. Whenever you recall a tool, it'll help you understand which tool you're selecting, which tool you're using, by showing you the icon next to the 3D cursor. So if I place myself above the segment, you can see that the segment will be highlighted with the blue color. This thing tells you which segment you're selecting. In this case, it's kind of easy, but whenever you have more complex shapes, it becomes useful. And if I click on the segment and I click and drag it, I will be creating a curve that whenever I release the button, it'll translate in a curve into the pattern itself. So I'll be doing a round curve here and one here to create the classic 2D pattern of the t-shirt. And now I'm ready to copy it, mirror it. And there's one thing that I need to explain about mirroring. It's kind of important because I want to be able to mirror something, but also have it symmetrically linked to my other half of the pattern. Because if I have to move a point, for instance here in this pattern, I want to be able to let it do it exactly the same thing, exactly the same way on the other half, without having to do it manually, because that would be increasing my my risk of committing errors and doing mistakes. So one thing that Marvelous allows us to do is by selecting the pattern. By the way, the select tool is the transform tool here, transform edit pattern, which is here, and you can call it with the shortcut A. Press A to use it. And if I have to mirror it, in this case, I will go with the right click on the mouse, and I'll go on to the submenu clone pattern with linked editing, because that's what I want. I want a clone of the pattern that I've selected, and I want it with the editing that's linked to its original one. So I go here and I select symmetric pattern with sewing. With sewing is actually quite important, because I can read just right under that's just symmetric pattern. It'll do the same. It'll create a clone and it will link it symmetrically, but it would not copy all the sewing lines that I would be doing later on. So if I want to skip that passage and redo all the sewing lines manually, and if I want to skip that, I just select this symmetric pattern with sewing. So I can see that whenever I click on it, I can see the shape of the pattern. I can position it. Keep in mind, as always, as I was explaining previously, whenever you place something for the first time in the 2D viewport, that's where it's been created in the 3D viewport. So I'll just place it right about here. Okay, that's what it's done, and it's quite correct. The positioning, it's good to me. And you can see that whenever something is linked symmetrically to something else, it'll be highlighted in blue. That's just another visual thing that Marvelous helps us with. And the other thing that I want to do is the back part of my t-shirt. So I can go and select with the A tool and shift pressed the two sides of the pattern. I can go with the Ctrl C, Ctrl V, classic way of copying and pasting things. Obviously, it'll be created here, but I want to place them on the back of the character. And so I show you one thing that is important in this kind of visualization of the 3D viewport. In this right moment, here and now, I can see where the normals of my meshes, of my patterns, are directed to. In this case, my normals are facing outwards, which is right. But starting with the icons here that I was showing you before, you can see that here, which is the icon for everything regarding the pattern visualization, you can have also the thick texture surface, which is this icon here, which will give your pattern some kind of thickness. This thing can get quite confusing because it'll add some thickness, and also it'll hide the way the normals are facing, because in this case, just in rendering visualization, so it's not actual geometry, but you can see that adding a thickness, you can have the patterns that have normals in each way, so in the front and in the back. This can get quite messy because whenever you export your model, the thickness will go away most of the time, because you don't want the thickness whenever you export. So keep in mind not to use this visualization, because you can end up with your models in other softwares that you can lose your normals. You can see things facing backwards, which is not what we want. We want to avoid that. So for this kind of workshop here and tutorial, we can just keep it with texture surface, but without the thickness. So I can actually see where my patterns are facing. In this case, I want to select these two patterns, which will be my back on my t-shirt. I want to turn them around, of course, and I'll place them at the back of my character with F, because I'm using Maya settings. It's what I do with to focus on my patterns if my camera goes a little bit wobbly around. And here we go. We have placed our patterns, and what we want to do now is actually sew the piece of the fabrics to create a t-shirt, because if I want to simulate now, by the way, the simulation shortcut is spacebar, and it's the most probably the most pressed button around Marvelous Designer, because it's what Marvelous Designer is actually useful for. And the simulation is right above here. And for every tool that you see here, if you see a little bit of an arrow pointing in the right below corner here, you can see that you have this arrow, not in every tool, but just in a couple of them, that indicates to you that you can press and keep pressed your left mouse button. And if you do so, you open up some kind of sub menu of the tool, and you have a little bit of variation of the same tool, so you can use. In this case, for the simulation, we have different types of simulations we can run in the software. I will be using the normal one, which is the default. The fast GPU simulation will allow you to simulate with the GPU, but of course it is faster, but it is a little bit more imprecise. And on the other hand, you have the fitting mode, which is actually a little bit heavier, because it'll try and calculate at its most power to create it more realistic. But you know, for the sake of this tutorial, we'll be using normal default simulation. So let's just leave it at that. If I simulate right now, of course, I don't have my pattern sewn. So what would happen is, we can see it. I'll press spacebar. The pattern will just fall to the ground. And of course, that's not what t-shirts behave like. So let's just press Ctrl Z. Or if you don't want to press Ctrl Z, we can actually just select the patterns. And in the 3D viewport with the right mouse button, we can just go and click on, where is it? Sorry, reset. Here we go. Reset 3D arrangement. And that's what it does. Just another way to do it if you don't want to go and undo the action. Okay, so we need to sew these pieces together to create the t-shirt. So we need to use another super powerful tool, which is the N tool, which is the sewing tool here above here. And what it allows us to do is actually create sewing lines to connect the patterns. But it can also be a little bit tricky. So keep in mind that whenever you place your 3D cursor above a segment, you can see a little perpendicular line. This is just a guide. It actually tells you the way the sewing line will be created. If I want to create a sewing line between these two segments of the fabrics, I need to pay attention to where the orientation of this perpendicular line is, because if I place myself here, the line will be here. If I place myself here, the line will be here. So if I do it like this, by placing here and not respecting the same orientation in this sewing line here and clicking on like this, what it will do, it'll just mess up my sewing line, and I don't want that, because that will twist my patterns, and that's not what it's what I want to behave it like. So keep in mind, pay attention to this little line here, because it'll tell us a lot about the orientation of our sewing line. So this is a correct sewing line. We want the lines to be straight. And of course, because I selected symmetric pattern with sewing, whatever I do on the right half of the pattern will appear also on the left side. And Marvelous will understand on its own where to place the sewing line between two patterns. So another sewing line will be here. Let's just go ahead and click them all. And here. And here. Okay, so I go back into my transform pattern tool with the A, and now I'm ready to simulate this thing. So let's press spacebar. That's what happens. Okay, it's a little bit too fitting. Maybe we need to make it larger a little bit. So I can recall another shortcut for another tool, which is really useful also. And the tool that I'll be using now to edit a pattern is the Z tool. This tool allows me to move around the points of the patterns and also move around the segments. Whatever you are placing your 3D cursor on, that's what you will be editing. So for now, I need to enlarge it a little bit. So I'll place myself here in this segment and just drag it around. Also, let me tell you that if you want to do things in a precise way and you don't want to move it like this by just dragging, you can also move it by a certain distance. You can do it by not releasing the left button. Once you're still dragging, click the right button and this little pop-up menu will come out. And you can type in just the precise amount of distance that you want to move it around. So I'll just go with the 3 centimeters and I'll press OK. And this thing helps me because I want to do the exact same thing here, because I want the patterns to have the same dimensions. So I can do it like this and just press right mouse button and just click on 3. And now I know that every segment is just right about the same equal distance between one another. So I just go back to the A tool. I'll press spacebar and I'll refresh the simulation. So my pattern now looks a little bit more, you know, just comfortable, my t-shirt. And also in the simulation, if you have the simulation active, so you can see the arrow that's turned orange, and you can see the little hand on the 3D viewport. That means your simulation is active. You can pinch and drag around your pattern in order for you to, you know, just place it a little bit better, just move it around, just do whatever fits your garment. It's really helpful. It can be used in a lot of different ways. You can be using it to help Marvelous fix a little bit of some simulation issues that can appear once in a while. You can use it to you know, create wrinkles whenever you want them more. You know, it's just for stuff like that, but you'll find yourself using it more often than you think. And once you deactivate the simulation by pressing again the spacebar, you can see that now in the 3D viewport you have your back your cursor with the move tool, with the move icon, and you know that you don't have your simulation on. So now we are off to a good start. We have a good base for a t-shirt, but now we are missing the sleeves, so we need to do the sleeves. And I'll just go on and create them with the H tool, which is what I've used before to create these patterns. But the shape for the sleeves, it's a little bit different. It took me a while to understand how they were, so you know, research and all the stuff that I've said before. It's something like this. Okay, I'll close this up. I'll create a curvature here with the C curve tool. I'll just call it with the shortcut, and I create just pretty much the same curvature. It doesn't have to be precise, but try to be as much as you can. I'll just move around the tangents of my curve, not the segment. Thank you, Marvelous. The tangents. So by pressing on the point, you can move the tangents. And the 2D pattern for the sleeve is like this. There we go. Here and here. Of course, I've created it here, so the positioning in the 3D world, it's here. So I move it around. One thing that you can use to help yourself placing the garments, if you don't want to manually move them towards the point that they belong to, you can also go around here in this icon, the character icon, the avatar icon, and you can press on the show arrangement points. These arrangement points are useful because you can just by selecting the pattern that you want, you can just place your cursor into the arrangement points, and just clicking on it, Marvelous will place the pattern accordingly to that arrangement point. It's useful because for now For instance, now I can see that my sleeve could be a little bit larger. So before even going on and sewing it, I can scale it a little bit. So with the transform pattern tool that I recall with the A, I can double click on this point here at the center, and you can see that now the points will be highlighted in orange. I can scale them uniformly like this, just by clicking and dragging. Now maybe the sleeve is correct. Now maybe it's better. And now I can go on and sewing it. I can go on and sew it with the end tool that I showed you previously, or I can use another tool which is useful. It's the MN free sewing. What this actually does is actually allowing you to select one or more segments on the same pattern, and connecting them by sewing to another segment to the other patterns, and not necessarily have the same length, which is good because it'll just calculate the segments and the sewing lines better. So it's more suggestible for this kind of situations. So I just go and select my starting point for the first sewing line, and I'll start here. I'll keep it just about here, and I'll repress. Now I press enter just to confirm that this is the first sewing line, and it goes from here to here. As you can see, now I've started from here, so I have to go on about this segment because I want to sew it together. So this segment, as you can see also in the 2D viewport, whenever I'm positioning the cursor above it, you can see the 2D viewport that shows you where that segment is in the pattern. So I'll go from here to here, and then I have to resew it also into this kind of orientation. So I have to select the other point that just continues my line, which is this one. So I'll press here and here. As you can see in the preview, it shows you the sewing lines that it's creating. So I'll just press it again, and I'll confirm it by pressing enter. And what it's done, it's actually creating sewing lines accordingly, and keeping in mind also the dimension of the patterns. It'll create some kind of calculation that allows you to have better sewing lines. I just suggest you to use it whenever you have patterns that don't really necessarily have the same length in the segments, and it's kind of popular tool. So don't be afraid to use it. It can be a little bit confusing at the first times, but once you get the hang of it, it's going to be useful for you. So now, before simulating, I can go on and create the symmetric pattern of this pattern here. So just selecting it and pressing right mouse button, I go with symmetric pattern with sewing and place it here. Now it'll shoot it in the infinite, like here. Okay, I'll just move it around, and I'll have Marvelous Designer understand better the simulation. F for focusing on the object once the camera goes crazy. And now I can simulate it. Okay, that's perfect. And now with the end tool, with the sewing tool, I can just go on and close the sleeves up. See, now I didn't pay attention where the perpendicular line was, where the orientation of my sewing line was. So it's actually intersecating, and I don't want that, because what it creates, it'll be like this, and it's not good. Of course, no sleeves behave like that. So let's just press Ctrl Z, and let's just redo the sewing line. Okay, in a straight line. That's good. That's what we want. Okay, and now we simulate it, and we have our t-shirt, and we can just go on and creating some pants. So the 2D pattern for the pants will be like this. Of course, I move the garment around because I want to have a 2D window that's kind of organized. I suggest you to keep it organized too, because if you do the basics like this, you know, it's not that hard, it's not that difficult, it won't get messy. But once you get the hang of it and you try to do more complex patterns, it can be quite messy. So I'll open up a little file project that I was working on some time ago later on, and I will show you what it can become messy. So just keep that in mind. So I've created this kind of piece of fabric here. Of course, as for the t-shirt, I want the exact same piece of fabric on the other half. But first, I need to move around the point. So Z tool for the edit tool, and I'll just bring it up here so it'll simulate better. Otherwise, it'll probably create some kind of strange shape in the front of it. By selecting it and right mouse button, symmetric button with sewing, and I'll place it here. Of course, I'll just move them a little bit around because I want to have a little bit of space here so that I can easily create sewing lines without going crazy and losing my eyes. And then by selecting them both, Ctrl C, Ctrl V for copying it, it'll place them here. I'll just move them around. I'll just translate them and I'll place them behind him. There we go. And it's really a basic 2D shape. You can probably spend some more time to it, but you know, it's just for the sake of teaching. And as I was saying, I will not be doing specific tutorials on how to do things, but what I want to do is actually get you interested in and just let you explore the software on your own. So do a little bit of research. And these are the sewing lines that create the pants. Let's just go ahead and press the spacebar for simulating it. Okay, just yeah. Probably, oh, I forgot sewing line. That's what it does when you forget something. And pants stay open on the back. Still not acceptable for modern society, so let's just not leave it like that. And I will explain to you something else, which is kind of fundamental in the world of Marvelous, which are we are not seeing the property editor yet because there's too much to say about it, and I don't want you to get bored with parameters and stuff here. But one thing you have to know is basically for every pattern there's a property which is called the particle distance and a property that's called the layer. These two properties really define what our simulation is going to be like. The layer is actually like a layer with every 3D software, which is or 2D software like Photoshop. It's a layer. You decide what stays up front and what goes under. And also this number can go in negative, so don't you worry. The character or the mesh will always be a collider for your garments. But what you're actually doing, for instance, now my t-shirt is at level 0, and I want to leave it like that because I don't want to touch it again. So let's say it's too complex of a pattern to have pieces here and around my 2D viewport. I don't want to select them all. I just want it to be at the layer that it's on. I can select my pants, and if I want my t-shirt to be up front over the pants, I can just go in negative and tell that the pants are at a layer of -1. And what it does, it's letting the t-shirt fall over the pants. In this case, it's not that necessary. But when you have things overlapping, or maybe trench coats or whatever type of garments you want to put over it, and you want to have a hierarchy of the layers, that's the parameter that you have to change. In this case, -1 is good. And the particle distance defines the density of the topology. Another thing that's really crucial to simulating in Marvelous, because whenever you change it, you change the way the fabric folds and it wrinkles up and behaves in general in the 3D viewport. So for now, if I want to see how dense the topology is for now, which is the default value at 20, I can go over here and select the wireframe mode, which is this icon here, wireframe on surface. and I can see that this is the topology I have in my t-shirt. Maybe it's a little bit not enough. I want a little bit more density into my topology for it to be folding a little bit better, less wibbly wobbly like this. I can select all my patterns for the t-shirt, and I can go around maybe 10. Keep in mind that you see how it changed. It really multiplies the topology and really gives it a little bit of density to it. And keep in mind two things: that usually whenever you have a garment that it's finished, that you want to export, you know, for texturing or just placing it in another 3D software for animating whatever, the usual particle distance that's used, it's around 5. If you go under 5, you can really have an heavier simulation for your PC. It's quite challenging to simulate because it's a lot of triangles, it's a lot of topology. So usually it's not that used, but if you want to use it at your own risk, because it'll get your scene heavier a lot. And usually the default value is 20, and my suggestion is use it while you're still working. Use it at 20 or maybe 15. Don't go under it, because you know you want your simulation to be fast and to be able to tweak it around. Whenever you get your scene too heavy, it can be messy and laggy, and you don't want that. So use a particle distance of maybe 15. So just for the sake of showing it to you, the particle distance at 10 will do it like this. And the other thing that you have to keep in mind is that your particle distance can change visually here, but it won't actually change until you launch the simulation. So launch it, and you can see that the wrinkles and the folds get a little bit more realistic. If you didn't do that, your topology didn't change from the particle distance of before. So keep that in mind. This is the particle distance at 10. You can have it at 5 if you want to see it. Here, you just have to type in 5. And what it does is this. So let's see how it simulates. You can see that it's more realistic, but you can also see that it tends to become laggy. Because if I drag it around, if I pinch it and trying to drag it, you know, it's not going to be as fluid as the value of 20 of the particle distance, which is normal because it's a lot more calculations. Look at the vertices and the triangles that you have in this mesh. But you know, you want to do this at the very end stage of your work, because that's what you do when you have to get the realistic side of your modeling out of your simulation, and not in the stages where you're still creating your pattern. So that was just for the sake of explaining. Also, another tool that I want you to use and know and get to know is the let me just bring these patterns back to maybe 15 so that I don't slow down my simulation. What you use also, for instance, if I want to create some kind of I don't know, a little bit of a pocket in this side of the fabric, is the internal line polygon tool, which is the G tool. It's over here. And what it does, you can create lines all over your patterns, whatever your imagination tells you, because you literally can create them wherever. I didn't want to confirm that line, so let me just do it again. Okay, you obviously, like everything else, you just confirm it by pressing enter or just double clicking it. Of course, I have my symmetry on, so if I don't want my symmetry on still at this stage, because I've done editing my shape and I just want to break the symmetry and do things on one half and not in the other, I can just go and select the patterns with the shift, right mouse button, and I go into remove linked editing. What it does is actually removing the link. It's self-explanatory. Now I can go and, for example, deleting this internal line, and this will stay because I don't have my my link. But if I want to link the two patterns again, I cannot do it because, see, it doesn't do it, because now my my right part is different from the left one. So the symmetry doesn't work like that. It has to have two exact identical patterns to work. And so, you know, you have to use it consciously what you're doing, because if you've worked on it and you've created some differences between the patterns, you have to know that you cannot use the symmetry again. So keep that in mind and try to remove it at the final stages of your editing. It's kind of crucial, because once you've done it, you cannot easily go back. So if I want to create a pocket, I created an internal line. This line is nothing at the moment, but I can do something with it. So I can select it without selecting the whole pattern. I can go with the right mouse button and I can maybe clone it as a pattern. So what it'll create a little bit piece of fabric that has this shape. And okay, it placed it here, of course, because it didn't pay attention of where I was creating it in the 2D view. Okay, I'll just place it here. And I can go on and sew it with the internal polygon line, with the end tool, which is the classic sewing tool, by pressing this segment here and just clicking on this here, and so forth. So with internal lines, you can do a lot. You can sew into them, you can clone patterns from them, you can cut from them, you can do whatever. So yeah, I can see the sewing lines here. I just press on the simulation and I created a little pocket. Of course, the pocket it's not that large, because I've created it on the same dimensions of the internal lines. But if I want to have it a little bit of more baggy, I can just select it and just scale it uniformly, as I was teaching you before. Just scale it like this, and the sewing lines will stay the same, because you can edit something even after you did the sewing lines. Just press spacebar and you can see now that it's more baggy, because it has just more space. So it's as simple as that. It's so intuitive and it's user friendly. And use the internal line tool as much as you can, because it's really useful. And of course, as I was saying before, the particle distance here changes the way it folds up. So instead of 20, if I go and press 10, I can see that it's more realistic. That's the principles of our Marvelous Designer, and you can do quite a lot of things. It's actually the possibilities are infinite, and I was just I just wanted to go around the fundamentals of the program, and I hope I got you curious of how Marvelous works. And yeah, feel free to ask anything about it, you know, under the comment section. And thanks for the attention. Goodbye.